The grand halls of the Cethary Dominion's High Court were silent as the judgment was delivered. Towering pillars of obsidian loomed over the two exiled prisoners, their violet energy cores pulsing like a heartbeat of an ancient empire. At the center of the chamber, seated upon a floating crystalline throne, High Queen Zeliura stared down at them with cold, golden eyes. Her shimmering robes of celestial silk seemed to glow with the power of 100 conquered worlds. "You have disgraced your people," the Queen's voice echoed, sharp and merciless. "You have defied the will of the Dominion." The two prisoners stood side by side, shackled in shimmering energy restraints. Vela, a proud warrior of the Draculi, clenched her fists, her sharp crimson eyes burning with defiance. She was tall, her body built for battle, her violet skin marked with the sacred battle scars of her kind. She had led countless raids across the stars, yet now she stood as a traitor. Beside her, Serenia of the Liverin remained eerily calm. Her deep blue skin shimmered like liquid starlight under the High Court's illumination, and her silver eyes reflected nothing but pure calculation. A scientist, a genius, but also a rebel. She had dared to challenge the Empire's laws, and now she would suffer for it. Their crime: mercy. A month ago, they had been sent to exterminate a weaker alien species that had dared to resist the Dominion. But instead of slaughtering them, they had refused the order, allowing the species to escape. This was treason of the highest order. The Dominion did not tolerate weakness. Mercy was weakness. Vela sneered at the Queen's words. "I do not regret my actions." Serenia tilted her head, her voice calm but firm. "Neither do I." The court gasped. No one defied High Queen Zeliura. The Queen's golden eyes narrowed, and she raised a hand, her fingers crackling with raw energy. "Then you shall suffer the fate of the weak." A giant holographic display flickered into existence before them, revealing a strange world. A planet covered in blue oceans and green lands, filled with primitive cities and bizarre creatures. Serenia recognized it instantly from the Dominion's archives. Earth, a backwater planet, isolated, unworthy of conquest. Vela's jaw tightened. "You mean to kill us by sending us to that cesspit?" "No," the Queen said, smiling cruelly. "I mean to let you rot there." The court murmured in approval. Exile was worse than death for warriors and scholars of the Dominion. To be cast out, stripped of their rank, abandoned on a primitive world among lesser beings, was a humiliation beyond words. "You will have no weapons, no way to return, no way to call for help." The Queen's voice was like ice. "You will learn what it means to be powerless." Before Vela or Serenia could protest, the floor beneath them glowed with blinding energy. Their restraints tightened, and a pulse of light engulfed them. The last thing they saw was Queen Zeliura's cold, victorious smirk. And then, darkness. Falling, a rushing storm of energy. Their exile had begun. Earth awaited them. The descent was violent. Vela woke to the sound of alarms, screaming inside the escape pod. Sparks flew from shattered control panels as the ship plunged through the sky, shaking so hard it felt like it would tear apart. Through the cracked viewing window, she saw a massive blue ocean and endless stretches of green land rushing toward them. The planet was ugly, chaotic, and wild, nothing like the grand, polished cities of the Dominion. Beside her, Serenia struggled to override the pod's failing systems. Her silver eyes flickered with frustration as she ran her fingers over the shattered console, but the controls were useless. "We've lost navigation. We're going to crash." Vela gritted her teeth and gripped the metal frame of the pod, then braced for impact. The escape pod slammed into the atmosphere, flames engulfing its surface as it tumbled toward the planet. Gravity crushed them against their seats, the heat threatening to cook them alive. Serenia's hands shook as she activated the last emergency thruster, trying to slow their fall. But it wasn't enough. The pod ripped through the sky like a burning comet, crashing into a dense, dark forest. Trees shattered, the ground exploded into fire and debris. And then, Silence. For a long moment, there was nothing but smoke and the distant crackle of fire. Then the hatch burst open. Vela stumbled out first, coughing as she waved away the smoke. Her warrior's body ached from the impact, but she ignored the pain. She had survived worse. Serenia followed, pulling herself out of the wreckage, her long blue fingers shaking as she touched her forehead. That landing was a disaster. No thanks to your piloting, Vela muttered, scanning their surroundings. They had crashed in a thick, primitive forest, far from any signs of civilization. Strange noises echoed from the trees. Animals, no doubt. The air smelled fresh, too fresh. It lacked the sterilized perfection of Dominion air, which only made Vela hate it more. Serenia exhaled, brushing soot off her silver-lined uniform. We need to assess our situation. Our situation. Vela barked a humorless laugh. We're stranded on a primitive world with no weapons, no allies, and no way off. She kicked the damaged pod in frustration. We're stuck here. Serenia, always the logical one, ignored her anger and crouched near the wreckage. Some of the technology is still intact. If I can salvage parts, we might be able to send a signal. There is no signal. Vela snapped. The Queen made sure of that. We're dead to the Dominion, remember? Silence. For the first time, the weight of their exile truly sank in. Vela clenched her fists, her sharp crimson eyes narrowing. She was a warrior. Warriors didn't sit and wait for death. Then we find the natives, she said firmly. We take what we need. We survive. Serenia hesitated. She had studied humans before, not extensively, but enough to know they were unpredictable, violent, capable of war, yet somehow compassionate. They might not be friendly. Vela smirked, cracking her knuckles. Neither am I. With no other choice, they began to walk. The dense forest eventually opened up to a dirt road, leading toward distant lights on the horizon. A city. Serenia glanced at Vela. Are we really doing this? We don't have a choice. Vela stepped forward. Let's see if these humans are as weak as the Dominion says. And with that, the two exiles marched toward the unknown. Earth had no idea what was coming. Vela hated everything about this planet. The air was too damp, the trees were too tall, and the ground was too soft beneath her boots. She missed the cold steel floors of a warship, the scent of ion fuel and polished weapons. This world smelled like dirt and life. Wild, uncontrolled, disgusting. Beside her, Serenia walked silently, her silver eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. She didn't seem as disgusted as Vela, but she looked just as lost. The humans build cities, yet they leave vast areas of wilderness untouched, she mused. Strange. Stupid, Vela corrected. Why allow weakness to exist? But as they reached the edge of the forest, both aliens froze. A massive structure loomed ahead, not one of the towering, sleek buildings of the Dominion, but something more primitive. Wood and stone, built by hand rather than machines. It was a cabin, standing alone beneath the darkening sky, its windows glowing with warm light. The air smelled of something cooked. Serenia frowned. Smoke. Meat. Vela's stomach twisted. They hadn't eaten since their exile. But before they could discuss a plan, a sound snapped through the air, a sharp click that made both aliens tense. Hands where I can see 'em. The voice was deep, firm, and calmly dangerous. Vela turned instantly, her body shifting into a fighting stance. Her crimson eyes locked onto the human standing a few steps away, holding a weapon unlike any Dominion tech. It was a long, sleek firearm, gripped steadily in his hands. The man was tall and broad, his dark hair slightly unkempt, his eyes sharp and focused. He was dressed in simple but rugged clothing. Nothing armored, nothing advanced, yet he held himself like a soldier. Serenia, ever the observer, whispered under her breath. He's assessing us. Vela smirked. Let him try. But before she could move, The man's finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't," he said, voice firm. "You're fast, but I bet a bullet's faster." Vela growled in frustration. This was a warrior's stance, a warrior's stare. This human was no weakling. She could see it in his eyes. Serenia slowly raised her hands, signaling peace. "We are not here to harm you," she said, her voice smooth, diplomatic. "We are lost." The man's eyes flicked over their strange clothes, their inhuman features. If he was afraid, he didn't show it. Instead, after a long moment, he lowered his weapon, just slightly. "Who the hell are you two?" Vela glanced at Serenia. They had no cover story, no false identity. Serenia chose honesty, partially. "We are travelers," she said carefully. "Our transport crashed. We have no supplies, no shelter." The man exhaled, eyes narrowing. He didn't trust them. Smart. But then he looked at their exhausted faces, the dirt on their skin, the torn edges of their clothes. He sighed. "You hungry?" Vela blinked. "What?" "I got stew on the stove," the man muttered. "Figure if you were gonna attack me, you'd have done it already. You want food or not?" Serenia hesitated. Vela did too. This human was offering them food, shelter, without demanding anything in return. "Why would you help us?" Serenia asked, suspicious. The man gave a short, dry chuckle. "You look like you need it." For the first time since their exile, Vela and Serenia had no words. The Dominion had warned them that humans were weak, but as they followed Caleb Rowe into his cabin, something told them they had been lied to. Vela didn't trust this human. As she stepped into Caleb Rowe's cabin, her sharp crimson eyes scanned every corner of the space. It was a simple home. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace crackling with warmth, shelves lined with books and strange human objects. A table sat in the middle of the room, 2 chairs pulled up beside it. Everything looked handmade, primitive, but despite its simplicity, it felt sturdy, built with purpose. She hated how warm it was, how safe it felt. Serenia, on the other hand, seemed fascinated. She moved carefully, her silver eyes drifting over everything, taking in the details of this human dwelling. "Interesting," she murmured, touching the edge of a chair. "You constructed all of this." Caleb shot her a look as he stirred something in a black metal pot over the fire. "Built most of it myself," he answered. "Why? Your people don't build things." Vela scoffed, crossing her arms. "We have machines for that." Caleb raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. Instead, he grabbed 3 bowls from a nearby shelf, filled them with steaming food, and set them on the table. The smell was strong. Meat, vegetables, something earthy and rich. Vela didn't move. "You expect us to eat this?" Caleb sat down and picked up his own bowl. "Nah," he said, taking a slow bite. "I expect you to starve if you don't." Vela narrowed her eyes. She didn't like this human's attitude. But her stomach growled in betrayal, and after a tense moment, she dropped into the chair, grabbing the bowl. Serenia followed, far more graceful, though her expression remained neutral as she lifted the spoon and tasted the food. Her silver eyes widened slightly. "It's not terrible." Caleb smirked. "High praise." Vela hesitated. She had never eaten anything like this before. Dominion rations were nutrient cubes, efficient, flavorless. Food was just fuel. This was different. She took a bite, chewing slowly. The warmth spread through her, filling her with something she couldn't quite describe. It wasn't just food. It was comfort. She hated that she liked it. Caleb leaned back, watching them. "So, travelers, huh?" Serenia glanced at Vela before answering. "Yes. We come from far away." Caleb snorted. "No kidding. You're not from anywhere around here." Vela tensed. Did he suspect? But Caleb only sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, I don't know where you two came from. And honestly, I don't care. You're cold, hungry, and lost. I ain't the kind of man who turns people away. Vela narrowed her eyes. No one helped others without a reason. And what do you want in return? Caleb frowned. Nothing. That answer bothered her more than anything else. No deals. No conditions. Just help for the sake of it. It made no sense. In the Dominion, kindness was a weakness, a tool to manipulate others. Yet Caleb acted like it was normal. Serenia studied him carefully. She seemed to believe him. And that annoyed Vela even more. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Then Caleb stood, grabbing a spare blanket from a chair and tossing it toward them. You can stay the night. There's an extra bed in the back. First thing in the morning, you two can figure out what you're doing next. Vela caught the blanket, stunned. You would trust strangers in your home. Caleb shrugged. Not completely. But I figure if you wanted to kill me, you'd have tried already. He glanced at Vela with a knowing smirk. Right. Vela didn't answer. Serenia nodded. Thank you, Caleb Rowe. Caleb grunted and walked off, leaving the two aliens alone. Vela stared at the fire, gripping the blanket tightly. Humans were supposed to be weak. But this one was dangerous in a way she didn't understand. And that unsettled her more than anything else. Vela barely slept. The bed was too soft, the air was too quiet, and the warmth of the blanket made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to comfort. Comfort made you weak. Beside her, Serenia slept peacefully, her silver eyes closed, her blue skin faintly glowing under the dim light of the fireplace. Vela envied her ability to adapt. Serenia was a thinker, a strategist. She could observe, learn, blend in. Vela was a warrior. She wasn't built for patience. And yet, here they were, trapped on a primitive planet, surviving on the kindness of a human. It didn't sit right with her. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the window, Vela was already awake. She stepped outside, inhaling the crisp morning air. The forest was eerily calm, mist curling around the trees. Somewhere in the distance, birds chirped and water rushed over rocks. It was so alive. The Dominion's worlds were nothing like this. Metal towers, artificial air, endless war. There was no time for silence, no space for something as pointless as a sunrise. Peaceful, isn't it? Vela spun instantly, hand reaching for a weapon she no longer had. Caleb Rose stood a few feet away, leaning against the porch railing. A steaming cup of some human drink rested in his hand, and his dark hair was even more disheveled than the night before. He looked tired, but calm. Vela frowned. How did you know I was here? Caleb smirked. You think I'd let strangers sleep under my roof without keeping an ear open? He took a sip from his cup. You move like a soldier. Vela stiffened. This human was observant. Too observant. She didn't respond, instead glancing at the forest. Your world is strange. Caleb chuckled. Yeah, I hear that a lot. He nodded toward the trees. Not from around here, are you? Vela tensed. Was this a test? Did he know? Before she could speak, the door behind them creaked open. Serenia stepped outside, stretching her arms as she blinked at the sunlight. Her silver eyes landed on Caleb, then Vela. She sensed the tension immediately. Good morning, Serenia said smoothly, studying Caleb. You rise early. Caleb snorted. Early? It's almost 7. Vela narrowed her eyes. 7 what? Caleb blinked. 7 o'clock. Morning. He tilted his head. You seriously don't know what time is? Serenia smiled politely. We are unfamiliar with your measurement systems. Caleb's gaze flickered between them. He wasn't stupid. He knew something was off. But instead of pressing, he sighed and took another sip of his drink. Well, you've got a lot to learn, he said. And if you plan to stick around, you're gonna need to blend in. Vela crossed her arms. And why would we stay? Caleb met her eyes. Because you don't have anywhere else to go. Silence. Vela hated that he was right. Serenia, ever the diplomat, spoke first. If we were to integrate, how would we begin? Caleb set his cup down and cracked his knuckles. First things first, you're gonna need clothes that don't make you look like you just stepped off a spaceship. Vela flinched. Had he just said spaceship, did he know? But Caleb only grinned. Don't look so shocked. You two stick out like sore thumbs. Lucky for you, I know a place. Vela exhaled slowly. This human was dangerous, not because of his weapons, but because he was smart. Too smart. And yet, they had no choice but to trust him. For now, Vela had never worn anything so soft. She pulled at the fabric of the plain gray hoodie, scowling. It felt too light, too flexible, not like armor. She hated how it moved with her body instead of against it. The jeans were worse, stiff but somehow fragile. If she needed to fight, these human clothes wouldn't protect her at all. This is stupid, she muttered. Across the room, Serenia examined herself in a mirror. The navy blue sweater fit her surprisingly well, and the black pants were snug but comfortable. She turned slightly, her silver eyes studying her own reflection. It's not as bad as I expected, she admitted. A bit primitive, but functional. Vela scoffed. It's ridiculous. These garments would not survive one Dominion battle. Caleb, sitting lazily on a chair, grinned at them. Good thing you're not fighting a war, then. Vela shot him a glare. You're enjoying this. Caleb shrugged. A little. You looked like a pair of lost cats walking into town with your old clothes. Didn't want people asking questions. They had gone to a small local store outside of town, an isolated place where few people would pay them much attention. Caleb had bought the clothes, telling the owner they were his cousins from out of state. Vela had nearly scoffed at the ridiculous excuse, but somehow it had worked. Humans believe things too easily. Now, back at the cabin, the reality of their situation settled in. They weren't warriors here. They weren't elite agents or feared Dominion soldiers. They were nobodies. Serenia turned from the mirror, her silver gaze sharp. Clothes are one thing. But if we are to survive here, we must learn how to act like them. Caleb nodded, standing up. Now you're thinking. He grabbed something off the table and tossed it towards Serenia. A phone. She caught it effortlessly, frowning. This is a communication device, correct? Caleb smirked. Close enough. That's a phone. You're gonna need one if you don't want people looking at you like you're aliens. Vela stiffened. That word again. Did he know? Serenia tilted her head. It is small. Caleb laughed. Yeah, well, humans like things small and portable. He stepped closer, tapping the screen. This is how people talk, send messages, look up information. You want to blend in. Learn how to use it. Serenia studied the screen, quickly adapting to the device. Within moments, she was scrolling through menus, absorbing the information like a sponge. This system is inefficient compared to Dominion technology, she observed, but I see its purpose. Caleb chuckled. Inefficient, huh? Try surviving without it. Vela crossed her arms. She didn't care about these human tools. She wanted weapons, armor, away off this planet. Caleb must have noticed her frustration. Look, he said, his voice more serious. I get it. You two aren't used to this. But if you want to stay under the radar, you need to act normal. Vela met his gaze. And what exactly is normal? Caleb smirked. Depends. Some people work normal jobs. Some go to school. Some just waste time online. But you two? You're gonna need a backstory. Something simple. Something people won't question. Serenia nodded. Agreed. What would be the most logical cover? Caleb leaned against the table, thinking. Then his smirk widened. You're my cousins from out of town, staying with me for a while. Vela groaned. That is a terrible idea. Caleb grinned. Yeah, but it's easy to remember, and no one's gonna question it. Serenia sighed. If it is the best option, then so be it. Vela clenched her fists. She hated this, but she had no other choice. For now, she would play along. But one thing was clear. Caleb Rowe was far more dangerous than she had thought. And that made him very, very interesting. Vela hated everything about this. She sat in the passenger seat of Caleb's old pickup truck, arms crossed, glaring out the window. The vehicle rattled slightly as it moved along the dirt road, kicking up dust behind them. It smelled like oil, leather, and something oddly comforting. Serenia sat in the back, completely calm, while Caleb drove with one hand on the wheel, the other tapping against the dashboard to the rhythm of some human song playing on the radio. Vela scowled. This transportation is inefficient. Caleb smirked. It's not a spaceship, princess, but it gets the job done. Vela bristled. Do not call me that. Relax, Caleb chuckled. You're wound up so tight, I'm surprised you don't snap in half. Vela clenched her fists but said nothing. This human was insufferable. The truck slowed as they approached a small town. From the window, Vela saw buildings lined up along the streets, cafes, stores, and groups of humans walking casually, talking, laughing. There were cars, but people also moved freely on foot, greeting each other like they all knew one another. It was nothing like the Dominion. No soldiers patrolling, no fear, no control, just life. Caleb pulled into a parking lot and shut off the engine. He turned to them. All right. First test, blending in. Serenia nodded. We must behave as humans do. Caleb pointed at her. See, she gets it. Then he looked at Vela. No glaring. No acting like you're gonna punch someone if they look at you funny. Vela scowled. I do not. You do, Caleb smirked. And stop walking like you're on a battlefield. Shoulders relaxed, no sudden movements. Vela gritted her teeth but said nothing. Caleb sighed and opened the door. Come on, let's get this over with. The three of them stepped out, and immediately, Vela felt exposed. The open streets, the sheer number of humans, it was unsettling. She wasn't used to being around so many people who weren't soldiers. No ranks, no commands, just casual conversations and laughter. It was unnatural. Serenia, of course, adapted instantly. She observed the people around her, mirroring their casual movements, offering polite nods when passing strangers. Her silver eyes held curiosity but not suspicion. She looked like she belonged. Vela, not so much. She stiffened when an older woman smiled at her. Her instinct was to assess threats, locate exits, prepare for attack. But there was no attack. Just humans, going about their lives. Caleb leaned in. You're staring too much. Look bored. Humans get bored a lot. Vela exhaled sharply and tried to relax her posture. It felt unnatural. They entered a small store, shelves lined with food and supplies. The scent of something sweet and baked filled the air. Vela watched as Serenia casually picked up an item, examined it, and placed it back. Perfectly normal behavior. Then Vela saw something strange. Near the counter, a man was speaking to a young woman, a store clerk, but something about his stance was off. His body was tense, his hand near his pocket, his eyes darting nervously. Vela recognized that look. He was about to do something stupid. Before she could stop herself, she moved. Caleb barely had time to react as Vela closed the distance between her and the man, stepping up just as he pulled something from his pocket. A knife. The clerk gasped, stepping back, eyes wide with fear. Vela didn't hesitate. She grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it sharply, and forced the knife from his grasp. He yelped, stumbling as she pushed him against the counter, pinning him effortlessly. The entire store went silent. Caleb cursed under his breath. Serenia closed her eyes briefly, as if already calculating how much trouble this would bring. The store clerk stared, wide-eyed. How did you? Vela realized her mistake too late. She had moved too fast, too efficiently. No normal human would have reacted like that. Caleb acted fast. He stepped forward, shaking his head with an easy grin. V's military. Instincts, you know. He gave the store clerk a charming smile. Good thing, too. The tension broke slightly as some customers muttered in agreement. The clerk nodded shakily, thanking Vela, who forced herself to step back. The man she had disarmed scrambled up and ran out the door. Caleb exhaled, rubbing his face. That was almost bad. Vela crossed her arms. I neutralized a threat. Caleb groaned. Yeah, but normal people don't neutralize threats in under 3 seconds. Serenia sighed. It seems we still have much to learn. Vela scowled. Blending in was going to be harder than she thought. Caleb drove in silence. Vela sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, her expression hard. Serenia sat in the back, her silver eyes distant, deep in thought. No one spoke. The truck rumbled down the empty road, the weight of what had happened at the store pressing down on all of them. Vela had acted on instinct. She had seen a threat and neutralized it, just like she had been trained to do. It had been the correct decision. So why was Caleb angry? Finally, she had enough. Say what you're thinking. Caleb let out a sharp breath, gripping the wheel tighter. I'm thinking you just made us a whole lot more interesting to the wrong people. Vela frowned. I stopped a criminal. Caleb glanced at her, frustrated. Yeah, and you did it so fast that now half the town is wondering if you're some kind of government agent, super soldier, or, I don't know, an alien. Vela tensed. That word again. He still didn't know the truth, but he was getting too close. Serenia spoke, her voice calm. The situation was difficult to predict. We must adjust our actions accordingly. Caleb scoffed. You think? They'd pulled up to the cabin, and Caleb shut off the truck. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly before turning to them. Listen, you two are already weird. People are gonna notice you. And now, they're gonna remember today. That's bad. Vela's jaw tightened. I will not stand by and let harm come to others. Caleb sighed. I get it, but you're not on a battlefield anymore. You're on Earth, where people don't just tackle knife-wielding guys in under 3 seconds. Vela didn't respond. She didn't regret her actions, but she understood the problem. Serenia, ever the diplomat, placed a hand on Vela's shoulder. We must learn from this experience. Moving forward, we should be more careful. Vela exhaled sharply but gave a slight nod. Caleb opened his door. Good. Now let's get inside before someone comes knocking with questions we don't want to answer. They entered the cabin, and Caleb immediately locked the door behind them. He rubbed his temples, muttering to himself. Okay, damage control. Maybe we say you used to be in law enforcement. Military. Something that explains why you move like a damn ninja. Vela crossed her arms. I refuse to be a part of your ridiculous cover stories. Caleb threw his hands up. Great, then enjoy being hunted by people who don't like unexplained mysteries. Serenia stepped forward, her expression composed. Perhaps it is best if we lay low for a while. Avoid unnecessary attention. Caleb nodded. Yeah. That means no more hero stunts. He looked at Vela. And no punching random people unless they're actively trying to kill you. Vela rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Silence stretched between them. The weight of their situation was settling in. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were being watched. Serenia glanced at the window. You do not believe the authorities will come to you. Caleb hesitated. Not yet, but someone will start asking questions soon. Vela's fingers twitched. She hated waiting, hated uncertainty. She needed action, a plan, something to do. Serenia seemed to sense this. She turned to Caleb. What would a human do in this situation? Caleb sighed. If they were smart, they'd disappear. Vela's eyes narrowed. That is not an option. Yeah, Caleb muttered. I figured you'd say that. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. He wasn't just worried about them. He was worried about himself. Because if someone came looking for answers, he would be caught in the middle. Vela watched him carefully. Caleb Rowe was a risk-taker, a man who lived on the edge of trouble but never quite fell in. But now, he was in freefall, whether he realized it or not. And she wasn't sure if he would survive the landing. The night was too quiet. Vela stood near the window, watching the dark tree line beyond the cabin. Something felt wrong. The air was still, unnaturally so. No wind, no rustling leaves. Even the insects had gone silent. Her grip tightened on the curtain as her instincts screamed at her. They were being watched. Behind her, Caleb sat on the couch, flipping a small knife in his hands. He had been quiet since they returned, lost in thought. He wasn't stupid. He knew trouble was coming. Serenia sat across from him, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light of the cabin. Vela, she said softly, you sense it too. Vela nodded. We are not alone. Caleb frowned and leaned forward. You sure? Vela turned from the window, her expression sharp. Yes. Caleb cursed under his breath and grabbed his jacket. All right, time to make a choice. We stay and hope it's nothing, or we get the hell out of here. Serenia stood gracefully, her gaze calm. Running will only delay the inevitable. Vela agreed. If someone had found them, escaping now would be pointless. She didn't run from fights. She ended them. Caleb sighed. Of course you want to stay. He muttered something else, then moved toward the kitchen. Well, if we're doing this, I'm grabbing my shotgun. The knock came before he reached it. All three of them froze. The sound was soft, too polite. Not the kind of knock that came from someone who wanted to break in, but from someone who knew they had already won. Vela's muscles tensed. Her mind raced through possible scenarios. Attackers wouldn't knock. The Dominion wouldn't be this subtle. So whoa. Another knock. Caleb exhaled and shot them a look. Okay, act normal. Vela frowned. I do not know how. Caleb smirked despite the tension. Yeah, no kidding. He walked to the door, hesitated for half a second, then pulled it open. A man stood outside. Tall, clean-shaven, too neat. His dark suit barely had a wrinkle, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Even in the dim porch light, his piercing blue eyes carried a sharpness that made Vela's instincts flare. He wasn't just some random visitor. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, forcing a casual grin. Can I help you? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Caleb Rowe. Caleb didn't confirm or deny it. Who's asking? The man tilted his head slightly, gaze flicking behind Caleb. He had already seen them. I represent an organization that investigates unusual events. His voice was smooth, professional. There was an incident earlier today. A man disarmed with exceptional skill. No hesitation. No wasted movement. Vela's fists clenched. Caleb laughed lightly, but there was no humor in it. So what? You track down good Samaritans now. The man's smile didn't waver. Let's not insult each other's intelligence. Serenia took a slow step forward. And what is it that you believe? The man studied her. I believe that neither of you belong here. Silence. Vela's heart pounded. He knew. Not everything, but enough. Caleb sighed. Look, man, if you're about to start talking crazy, maybe you should. The man reached into his coat. Vela moved instantly. She closed the distance in a blink, grabbing his wrist and twisting hard. But before she could disarm him completely, he countered. His strength was not normal. Vela's eyes widened as he twisted free with almost unnatural speed. He was trained. More than that, he was enhanced. Serenia lunged next, aiming for a pressure point, but the man anticipated it. stepping back with perfect precision. Caleb grabbed his shotgun. Okay, screw this. The man raised his hand slightly, still smiling. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to make an offer. Vela and Serenia didn't lower their guard. The man's blue eyes locked onto Vela's. You don't belong here, but you don't have to be enemies. There are others like me, people who know the truth, people who can protect you. Vela narrowed her eyes, and in return, the man's smile widened. Loyalty. Silence stretched between them. The weight of the choice settled on their shoulders. Caleb scowled. Yeah, that's gonna be a no from me. The man chuckled. Think about it, but don't take too long. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like a ghost. The moment he was gone, Caleb locked the door and turned to them. That was bad. Serenia nodded. Very. Vela exhaled slowly. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were being hunted. And now, they had to decide their next move.